So, observational study versus an experiment. The explanations, I think, are pretty self-explanatory, but the experiment is really where we're going to spend our focus, because observation is just really, it's data collection. You've already done that. When you collected your data for the tech assignment, that was an observational study in most cases. Right? There are some instances where people, one way or another, so in some cases it was accidental, conducted an experiment, and that it was pretty cool to see that. And that's the other thing. So I don't want to talk too much about the project right now, but I will say that if there is some data that you collected for your tech assignment that you're like, I'd like to go further with this and use that for the project, you're welcome to do that. All right, so, and the reason I bring that up is because there were a couple of folks who had collected personal data, and that personal data, I would imagine, is very important to them, and they can draw some meaningful conclusions, and the reality is the math is pretty much already done. Right? So that's good news. It involves an imposition of one or many treatments, helps determine cause and effect relationships. So for example, if you changed some sort of dietary habit, or you changed some sort of condition within your life, maybe you started going to the gym, as opposed to, like me, sedentary lifestyle, it sucks, but yeah, I have a nice gym membership at Lifetime. It's a solid $360 a month donation, because last time I went there was June. Yeah. So sometimes if you're anything like me, you figure like just having the membership is all you need. Like, you don't actually have to go. Why did you have to go? I'm paying all the money. It's supposed to magically happen. Yeah, no, it's just working 2 jobs, 4 nights a week, then the Saturday morning.
Yeah, it's time the kids are.
Yeah.
That's a nice gym though.
Yeah, it is. It is. When I've gone there, I've enjoyed it, but I don't always get there. But one thing I like, they have a nice cafe there. I never understood the concept of selling alcohol at the gym. It's like, yeah, I just had this great workout. Now give me a beer. Like, no, that's not. Like, Lifetime Fitness? Lifetime Athletic. Whatever, it's called Lifetime. But it's a nice one. Yeah, I should go. Maybe we'll go after this. I'm like shaming myself here. So, but yeah, the whole idea is to determine cause and effect relationships, because if you change some habit, like maybe you're a smoker and you're like, well, if I chew more gum, I'll smoke less, right? Or maybe you're the kind of person who speeds in your Audi to work, and you figure, I'll take a different route to work, and if I do that, maybe I'll control my speed a little bit more, and I won't drive like such an imbecile, like all Audi drivers do. So, like it would be something that you could use to determine cause and effect relationships. Right? I gave a kind of a ridiculous example: observing the time it takes an individual's passage through a maze. Right? So a person's progressing through a maze, like one of those life-size mazes, cornfield mazes, kind of thing. And then observing the time it takes an individual's passage through a maze after you place a hungry/angry lion in the maze. Right? So that's your condition, your treatment. You've imposed a new condition to the situation to create a cause and effect relationship. Now, it would not obviously make for a good experiment, because it is possible, the lion is going to motivate a person to make their way through the maze a lot quicker, but the lion may also like savagely maul to death the person, in which case they never get out of the maze, right? So yeah, not the best idea, but yeah, it's really the idea that there is a treatment involved. Okay, so the treatment is the statistical word. I think it's a terrible word, because treatments usually sound like a positive thing, but it's really a condition or a catalyst. I like condition better. So it's a condition that causes change. All right. So it's something that wasn't there before. All right. And that's the only way that you can establish cause and effect, by having some sort of condition that you're applying to a situation to see what happened before that condition, or what happens without that condition being imposed, and what happens with that condition being imposed, and then comparing the two. Now, if you are focusing on an observational study, these terms, if you're writing a paper, these would work their way into the vocabulary that you use, but it's basically past tense, present tense, and future tense. Because if you're collecting data, that's really the only ways that you could do it if you're not the one that's conducting the study yourself, in which case it would be real time, right? So, or the experiment. So past, present is the first one. Helps if I actually read the statements. Present, past, and future. All right, so cross-sectional, you just, in a moment in time, you collect data. All right, cross-sectional happens pretty much all the time. When you go to the doctor's office and they take your blood pressure, your temperature, your weight, and everything, they get all your vitals, that's cross-sectional data. They're getting it right in that moment. All right, retrospective, well, could still be in the doctor's office. All right, they just collected your cross-sectional information. They just got your vitals. And they said, whoa, your blood pressure is a lot higher than it was last time. All right, well, they're referring to retrospective data. The last time, the last two times, over the last couple of years. All that information that they collected in the past is retrospective data. All right, now projecting that out into the future would be longitudinal. All right, so we're going to keep an eye on your blood pressure now, because it's been, over the last couple of times that you've been here, your blood pressure's been a little bit higher. It's a little in the red zone. We don't really like it. So we're going to keep an eye on your blood pressure for the next 6 months and see where it goes. And if we have to medicate you, we'll medicate you. That's longitudinal. All right. So you're in the doctor's office. They take your vitals, cross-sectional. They compare it to what came before, retrospective. They decide we're going to keep an eye on you in the future, that's longitudinal. All right. Now, they didn't impose any treatments. All right. There's no medicine involved. All right. So it's not an experiment, it's just observation. We're going to keep you here for observation. Observational study, that's what it is. All right. Now, the doctor 6 months later says, all right, your blood pressure hasn't improved. We're going to start you on a course of this medication or whatever. All right. So, lisinopril, whatever. I'm allergic to that, so I can't use it anymore. So, they start you on a medication, lisinopril. And they said, we're gonna try that for 6 months, see how it goes. Right, now they just imposed a treatment. Now that treatment actually is a treatment. It's the way you would think of a treatment. But it is a condition that's applied to you. Right? They gave you something that is supposed to evoke change. So whether or not it causes the desired change is actually irrelevant in the moment. The fact of the matter is, it is supposed to cause some kind of change. Right? That makes it a treatment, and we just made our observation into an experiment. All right? When the doctor says, we'll play around with dosages, isn't that the same thing as saying we're going to experiment with dosages? All right? So we'll try this dose for 3 weeks, a month, and then we'll see how things are going, and then if we have to up the dosage or downgrade it, we can do that based on what occurs. All right, so that's all experimentation. It's just they tend to want to stay away from the word experiment when they're talking about medication, in the doctor sense. Now there is a way. Now, just going back to my example, you got your blood pressure taken. They compared it to the past, and they said they're going to keep an eye on you in the future. There is a way that could be an experiment. All right. White coat syndrome, is that what it's called? That's the one where your blood pressure spikes because just of anxiety related to just being in a doctor's office, right? So a doctor comes in wearing a white lab coat, one day takes your blood pressure. Doctor comes in not wearing a white lab coat, another day takes your blood pressure. Now they changed something about their mannerism that was designed to cause change in your response. All right. Now that's kind of mean of them if they're wearing a white lab coat just to see whether or not you're gonna spike your blood pressure and then put you on blood pressure medication because of it. Like that's not reasonable. And in fact, if that's the case, they may chalk your blood pressure up to the white coat syndrome. So in my personal experience, what happened was blood pressure was high a couple of times. Doctor told me to get a blood pressure monitoring device. Go home, take my blood pressure 3 times a day for 2 weeks, I believe it was, and then send her all of the measurements, which all came back normal. So she's like, all right, we don't need to medicate you. You have white coat syndrome. And like you're just getting bugged out while being in the doctor's office. Right? Because honestly, most of the time I'm in a doctor's office, they want to shove a needle in me somewhere. So yep, I'm already on guard the minute I walk in. So there's some autonomic response that's occurring that I just have no control over. Right? But by me doing it in my own environment, it was perfectly fine. Right? So that's something that could happen. But you don't know that you're conducting an experiment until you're sitting in a class like this and you're like, oh, so that's what that was, right? Because she's doing the blood pressure, or she's taking the blood pressure under normal circumstances from her perspective. But then sending me home and telling me instead of introducing a treatment, I'm removing some sort of condition that existed within the office. So by removing something, that's the same thing as applying a treatment. All right. So you're changing some aspect of the situation. By doing that, you're making an observation into an experiment. Any change that you impose makes something an experiment. Right. So when we design an experiment, we have to keep in mind all of this vocabulary. But again, some of it is obvious, like the subject. You see that in movies all the time. The subject presents with lesions all over their friggin' body. It all depends. Like you watch one of those outbreak movies. There's one called Outbreak. It's pretty bad, but it was like kind of a cult classic at the time. But yeah, you can have different scenarios related to subjects, but that's specifically related to humans. So you would not refer to a dog or like an object as being the subject of a study, right? It's specifically related to humans. Experimental units are kind of like the governing body of all of that stuff. So experimental units are pretty much anything that you're conducting an experiment on. The subjects are the humans that are experimental units. The treatment we talked about, explanatory variable is what your input is, and response is what your output is. All right. So if there's going to be a cause and effect, what's going to happen is there is going to be a change in the response based off of the explanatory variable. All right. So my treatment might be lisinopril. The explanatory variable would be the amount of lisinopril that is being administered. The response would be the blood pressure change or the level of blood pressure at any given moment in time. All right. So I can write that one down because that's an easy one. But what you would want to do is start thinking about, like your own personal example of a situation that could follow some characteristic like that. Maybe you have asthma. Maybe you have some other medical condition. Maybe you want to stay away from medical. Maybe you want to talk about education in some capacity. Because you could be thinking about, like, you studied for a test on your own, didn't do so well, went to a tutorial center or formed a study group. That's your treatment, right? The explanatory variable would be the amount of time that you spent within your study group. The response would be performance on your test, right? So I'll just write my example here. Lisinopril. Amount of lisinopril. and then the response would be the blood pressure. Lurking variable is the fun one, or lurking variables. They're fun to think about, but they're incredibly disastrous when it comes to the design of a study. I mean, you can see by definition a variable that's unaccounted for in the design of your experiment. All right, so I'm thinking blood pressure here. So, well, anything that could impact blood pressure would be a lurking variable. All right, so drinking gallons of coffee on a daily basis. Salt intake. All right, just not being hydrated. You know, so drinking gallons of coffee but not drinking a corresponding amount of water. All right, fitness. I mean, the list goes on and on. Right, so stress. Like anything you could think of. These are all variables that come into play, and if we don't control them, if they're not accounted for, they're going to screw up the study, right? Because, you know, doctors deal with this all the time, and I know this because they say I deal with this all the time. And what happens is they talk about blood pressure medicine, and they say, all right, well, tell me about your day-to-day life. And then I say, you know, like, this is what I do, this is what I don't do, and things along those lines. Because they need to account for stuff. Because if it turns out that you're drinking copious amounts of caffeine, coupling that with copious amounts of alcohol, while not hydrating yourself with water, salt intake, while working on Wall Street and getting yelled at on a daily basis, like, it's like no amount of blood pressure medicine is going to help you. You know, so these are lurking variables that come into play. So when they start you on a course of the regimen of the medicines, and then 6 weeks later find out that your blood pressure is not even remotely improved, like you can't blame it necessarily on the medicine. Was the medicine ineffective? Well, maybe it was what was keeping you from dying. You know, because it could have been just a matter of like a couple of more points in the bad direction that could have tipped you over the edge. Maybe that's what was just kind of keeping you where you were, but you weren't improving with it because how could you under those circumstances? All right. So these are things that you need to account for, because if you don't, it's going to mess up your entire study. All right. Your study will be confounded. All right. There is no discernible way, or no way in any reasonable way that you could distinguish what the causal factor was in the outcome. All right. So I have an example here. I found these diagrams online. My tomato plant example. So I have 5 different plants, not necessarily grown at the same time, but it really doesn't matter. One where, you know, the seeds are consistent, they're all tomato plants. One, I just gave it dirt and hoped for the best. Second one, I gave it dirt and water. I was very generous. Next one, I gave Miracle-Gro soil and water. Miracle-Gro soil. The formatting got off a little bit here. All right, so instead of just flat out dirt, I gave it the good stuff. I went to Home Depot. I spent a little money. All right, so I got the Miracle-Gro soil, and I also gave it water. So a little bit more growth. All right, Miracle-Gro soil, water, and also I was very generous, provided it some sunlight. And then for the last case, I gave it, in addition to Miracle-Gro soil, water, and sunlight, I gave it some plant food. All right. So the question here would be, how did plant E grow to be the largest / most bountiful? All right. Well, if you're comparing it to D, it looks like it was the plant food. All right. So I'm just going to make a note of that. If I'm comparing it to D, If I'm comparing it to D, it was just a plant food. That's what made the difference. Because it looks like the height of the plant is relatively consistent from C to D to E. You know, a little bit taller for E, but in the same neighborhood, right? From C to D, there was a little bit more flowering. Oh, actually, the same amount of flowering. It's just some of those flowers became tomatoes. But then in E, I mean, we got a salad here. I mean, it's a good-looking tomato plant, right? Now, if I'm comparing it to A, no idea. All right. So if my study, like if I wanted to do a tomato plant study, and all I did was create two potted plants, two potted tomato plants, one where I just put some seeds and dirt in a bowl, and the other where I did the whole 9 yards. From here to here, I'd look at this and say, well, was it the Miracle-Gro soil? Was it the sunlight? Was it the water? Was it the plant food? I don't know. This is confounded. I can't make a determination of what caused that plant in E to be such a delightful looking tomato plant. But if I have the progression of all 5 of them, I know exactly what it is. And in fact, as it turns out, and that's the thing, as it turns out. So I don't know this going in. But as it turns out, I only really needed D and E, but I don't know that until after the fact. So this is one of those where, like, I conduct the whole study and I'd say, I guess I didn't need A, B, and C. But I already did it, so whatever. So if I'm doing a project on this, in the follow-up I would say, it seems that plant food is the only thing that needs to be buried. So for a further study on this, I would only focus on that. But this takes too long, and it's also the wrong time of year. So probably not a good idea for a project. Yeah, it's very important that you keep these things in mind, because if you allow too many lurking variables, then, you know, what kind of paper are you going to write about this? You know, you'd say, well, I could make a beautifully bountiful tomato plant if I have these ingredients, but I don't know which one's the most important. So best of luck figuring it out. And then you associate price points with each one of these things. All right, water, okay, so water, sunlight, probably not, but Miracle-Gro soil and plant food, I don't know how much those cost. At one point I did, but I don't know how much those cost. Is it really expensive? It turned out that the only difference between this one and this one, again, was the plant food. Now, what if I conducted a similar study after I did this and I said, okay, do I really need the Miracle-Gro soil? Right, because these two were pretty consistent in terms of their height. This one had a lot more tomatoes. Maybe that was just because of the plant food. Could I get away with just regular soil from the backyard? If that's the case, then maybe I could save myself money on the Miracle-Gro soil. So that would be my follow-up study. Right? So a lot of things that you can do going into this. But, you know, it's interesting. I think the most interesting part about this is that the stuff we already do. All right, you experiment in the kitchen. I do anyway. Like when I make my beef stew, like 2 tablespoons of A1, all right, and a teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce. Do I need the teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce? I don't know. Next time I make the recipe, I leave out the teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce, because I don't think it's adding any new flavors. I don't think it's adding any flavors that the A1 isn't already adding. All right, and the French onion soup. You know, so if that's the case, then I can not worry about the Worcestershire sauce. But I'm not going to write a statistical analysis on that. I'm just doing an experiment on the fly. All right. Same thing with my tomato sauce. You know, like I put a little sugar in there. but do I have to put as much sugar as I'm putting in there? Or if I use a different type of tomato, will that get the job done? You know, so these are some things to consider. Just look around your everyday life and see how you're using experiments. Because when you're thinking about, do I want to do a project or a paper on this? Odds are you already have the ingredients to do that. You know, like you in your everyday life, you have the circumstances. You've already done these things. It's just a matter of taking the time to collect some data on it. All right. And maybe I'll pick up some new recipes from you. I mean, really,